Hey, Crystal. Thank you so
Hi.
much for meeting me. I am so, so excited.
Me too, definitely. Thank you for having me, Andrea.
This is so, so great. So I would love it if you told people more about you. I know do you want to go by Dr. Crystal? I like totally was just like Crystal.
No, Crystal's great. Crystal's great. Yes, yes. Where do you want me to start?
So I don't know if this is too far back. I know that you are in recovery as well, which for me, that's just incredible. I know how, as someone that's in recovery as well, it's not always feel like you think it's gonna get easier to talk about it, but it still can get uncomfortable at times. So I would love it if you started there.
Sure, definitely. And I agree with you. I think sometimes it's kind of dependent upon who you're with too, because the stigma is still so palpable that there's always this fear of, oh, well, what will they think of me when they find out that I am a junkie, that I use needles and that kind of thing. And for me, it started when I was about 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. My parents split and got a divorce. My mom and I moved someplace, and she was really busy working as much as she could. And I was a really good kid. I was a smart kid, only child, and kind of took care of her a lot. And she just trusted me to take good care of myself. And I started hanging out at the neighborhood pool at this new place and met people, and just felt so insecure, uncomfortable in my own skin. Like middle school, all of a sudden I just felt really awkward. And then somebody said, I'll introduce you to a bunch of people, and we'll go to this party. And I drank my first beer, and then it was a bottle of alcohol. And then I just thought, dude, this is the answer. I don't have any anxiety. This is like the life of the party. I feel great. Why didn't my mom tell me about this sooner? I remember having that thought, which is crazy. Because, of course, a parent would never give alcohol to a kid to relieve anxiety. But then we moved every year. So I kept, I had this bright idea of taking summer school to get to know kids. But the kids who take summer school are not necessarily the ones making the best choices, right? So I met great kids who were making yucky choices. And I ended up just using more and more and more and more, and getting introduced to, kind of different crowds that had heavier music and heavier drugs. And I always did so well in school that I graduated a year early from high school and went straight into college. I'd taken all those summer school classes too, so I was ahead, right? But man, when I got into college, I left home, I got a job, I got a roommate who had a drug dealer connection, and I thought I was so grown, and, just so immature. And that's when I really started using heavier substances. And another really cute guy said, well, if you like cocaine, you should definitely try it in a needle. And prior to that, I had a judgment about people who use needles, and I was definitely never going to do that. But in my codependency and low self-worth, then this cute guy was taking me under his wing, and I was really susceptible to that and said, yeah. And then as soon as he did it, I grabbed the needle and started to learn how to do it myself, and just fell in love with drugs that way, and could not stop on my own. And I had an overdose, and that really scared me. And so after that experience, I reached out to call my mother, which was the most humiliating phone call ever. We had such a tumultuous relationship. To ask for help from her was, humiliating. And I'll just never forget the look when I opened my arms and I showed her what I had been doing. It was like this simultaneous look of terror and disgust in her face. Thank goodness though, she helped me find a rehab, and I got admitted just a couple days after that. And I was 18 at that time. And so I went into an adult unit, And I still actually have the big book that I had from there, and it's got all these signatures of the people that I went to treatment with. I try to keep track of a lot of them, but some of them have died, and some of them are still using. But I went to a halfway house in a different city from that point, and which was really critical to get away from all my using friends and drug dealers and all that all the triggers. And I got to this really beautiful halfway house. They call them sober living facilities today, but back then it was still a halfway house, and it was in Omaha, Nebraska. It was a place called Santa Monica, and I lived with 18 other women. They taught me how to live sober, how to do social activities and recreational activities sober, and really started me off on a really great track of being a woman of integrity in sobriety. And so I lived in Omaha, Nebraska for my first 5 years of recovery. When I finished there, I got an apartment and I went to the University of Nebraska at Omaha, started studying psych. And I couldn't leave my community too. It was just, I'd grown up with a lot of young people in recovery there, and they used to have dances every month, and 500 young people would come from all over. And it just was such a magical time in my life. And then I moved from there and came back to Texas and to get a master's degree. And I just started studying everything I could get my hands on about addiction. And right about that time, all these brain studies were being published. And I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I started to realize, oh my gosh, drugs and alcohol shut off the frontal lobe. Right? And how lucky was I that I got sober at 18. I still had 7 years of frontal lobe growth to go and healing to go. But how do people fare when they don't stop until later? And my husband's in recovery, and he didn't stop until his later 20s. And so, and I work with people who are later in recovery, and you can see the arrested developmental effects on their executive functioning skills. And so I just kept studying and studying and studying. I went back to get a doctorate. I created a prevention program that's being done at a few schools in Houston. We're actually going online with a local charity to make everything that's in the book accessible to teachers and students and parents. And I feel so very grateful that I'm alive, and I've been able to not just stay sober, but, make this horrible, humiliating experience useful to other people.
I'm gonna tear up too.
Yeah.
It's just, I honestly feel like I was going to when you were talking, because I want to give you a hug so badly.
I do too. Thank you. But that's my story. And a few years ago, I was very lucky. A local charity had a behavioral health fellowship available, and I applied to it, and they supported me to write the book. And so I know this is the 3 years of research, and it was really important to me because people read differently today. And so I wanted to make it really graphically enjoying. No page is the same, with lots of fun pictures and lots of, brain development information. And no topic is longer than 2 to 4 pages. And so and of course there's over 500 references in it, but it really teaches about healthy brain development, what that looks like, and then how high-risk behavior affect brain development. And then there's an elementary, middle, and high school chapter which shows a graph of 18 different high-risk behaviors and how they increase over time. So as a parent, then when to have your prevention conversation. And then it's also got what can you do as a parent? What are the healthiest parenting styles, communication techniques that really help kids prevent high-risk behavior as they grow and develop. And then my favorite chapter is chapter 6, that has scripts. So a lot of times parents are like, oh my God, what do I say? And I was like, I can help you figure that out. So scripts for building executive functioning skills, and how to validate, and how to not engage in power struggle worms, and what to do. Also at the end, what to do if they end up using, and how to help. And so I've got a talk for all the behavior. So, there's a pornography talk, a drug and alcohol talk, a sex talk, a dating violence talk, a popularity talk. Like, how do you teach your kids refusal skills? And so I got to say that my mom bought this book recently and read it. And it was kind of a bittersweet moment because she said that it was beautiful and she really enjoyed it. It made her really feel sad because it was like all of the things she didn't do with me. But I got to say, nobody teaches this stuff. Like, you don't learn it. And so my goal, my mission was to make sure that you had, as a parent or a family or a loved one, all the information that you needed at your fingertips. Now, of course, that doesn't guarantee your kid won't, but it sure does prevent and teach and support you in those efforts, right? And what to do if it happens. Even some information about genetic testing and how to support your kid if they do have to go to treatment, what that looks like. So it's been really cool. It's been out for 2 months now, and yeah, I'm really excited about it being available and to talk about it like this. It's such a dream come true for me, and I just pray and hope that it really does help parents prevent behavior. And then, so one more story. I've got a great colleague who's got a 13-year-old. And she walks in the living room one day and catches her 13-year-old reading it.
No.
And I was like, oh, dude, you need to get a review from me because like that's gold, right? So she waits a few days because she said, if I mention it right away, like that I like it, she won't like it anymore. So she was so strategic about it. But the 13-year-old, she said, I really like this book. She tells the truth. And I thought, man, like that is what I really wanted to hear. So she inspired me to write a kid version. And so that's in the works, right?
Oh,
I know, right? Isn't that cool?
So incredible.
The Spanish version is almost finished, and the Audible is actually, I was in a studio for 6 weeks reading it out loud, which was not easy because it's so graphic. I had to like read like, how do I read this out loud? But it's going to be in an Audible version within this month. And so I'm trying to get it in formats and in prices that are cheap enough that a lot of people can get access to it.
That is so incredible. The thing that just popped up for me, I'm like, wow, if I had this, you mentioned middle school, and I could relate so much to your story. My parents got divorced when I was 7, and I love my mom. God, I love her. But again, it's being a single mom.
Yeah.
You tend to put a lot more trust in your kids than you probably should.
Should, right.
Yeah.
Just because you have to, right? Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't have another option. And I will say when I was younger, I was scared to do drugs. Like that's one thing I'm like, I was a scaredy cat. I was like, no, my uncle OD'd off of heroin. So it was very, very, very prominent from a very young age. So for me, it was just like, oh man, you can't do that because you die.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 12, 13, my life is literally turned upside down because now we're moving out of the States. And I know that if we move, I'm not going to see my dad. My dad can't show up. So if he doesn't show up and we live in the same city, he's not going to show up if I'm living in a different country. And I didn't feel safe talking about how I was feeling because on one end, I know that he did bad things and I know all of this, but he's still my dad and I still love him. But on another end, I can't really say anything because I'm aware that he did all of these things. And I was 13 and we moved to Panama and the drinking age is 18. And I remember I was not at all the party kid. I was very much the kid that stayed at home. But when you are put in a situation, I skipped 8th grade also, that did not help. And now I'm exposed to all of these things and I'm like, oh my God, I'm super insecure. I hate being here. And I'm thrown into a box because I'm from the US. So I have to fulfill the roles that you see in all these movies. So I'm either the nerd or the party girl. Like, they were already slapping a label. And not having those tools to be able to say, no, I don't want to do this. It was just easier to go with that label and just kind of like, all right, you think I'm a party girl? Okay, let me just drink. And it was that aha moment when I drank for the first time. I thought, oh my God, I'm not scared if people are looking at me. I can breathe. I'm not preoccupied with my dad like I am 24/7. Oh my God, I can just be a kid. So it was this kind of there. And fast forward getting to college, here I now was exposed to everything. And I get what you were saying with needles, because that was the one thing that I always said, I'm not going to do that, because if I do that, then I really have a problem. If I'm doing everything else and it's not a problem, I'm just having fun. That was what I told myself.
Yeah.
I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder my freshman year because of all my trauma, and add in the drug and alcohol. And then you take a kid that feels broken and you're like, well, this is why you're like this. Let me slap on this label. You give me medication and I take them. I don't like how I'm doing. So I'm going to start self-medicating, which means I'm going to take what you give me when I want to, and I'm going to do what I continue to like to do because you're not giving me results I like. And that ended me in my mom getting called by a really good friend saying, either you come and pick her up or she's going to kill herself. She's in a death row right now. She does not care. She's not going to class. What you said about your mom, when she went to pick me up and we went into my dorm room to pack up everything, and she saw pills and cocaine everywhere and just all this stuff, I could see it in her face that she was just like, where did I lose the kid that left to this? Yeah. And when we finally talked about it, I'm like, it wasn't anything you did. It was the lack of me being able to be intimate and being able to say, hey, you know what? I need help. Hey, you know what? I'm suffering. Hey, I am struggling and I don't know how to talk about this. That it was just easier to do drugs. And I'm bringing all of this up because right now we're in our current climate. I don't even want to go into talk about politics or anything, but where we're at right now, I feel like we are going back into that state of that uncertainty of when you're a little kid and you're dependent on everything. And sadly, we don't have the tools. A lot of us don't. I'm not trying to put it all on the parents, but if your parents can't show up for themselves in that way, how can they teach you that? Yeah. And I see it now because, and I was looking at what you were saying, and I'm like, the first time a kid is looking at porn is 9? Like, I was just like, how is that a thing? Well, yeah, parents are working so much, kids are home alone all the time. My nephew is 5 and he orders stuff like on iTunes, and I'm like, how does he know how to do that? I still am not tech savvy. So it's like, we're looking for things to give us that satisfaction, that immediate gratification of I don't have to deal with feeling like crap or feeling all these yucky insecurities, and I can grab drugs or food or TV or insert whatever to cope because I don't want to deal with it and I haven't been given the tools. So the fact that you're literally creating something for kids at such a vulnerable age, and also for parents, because you're right, I laugh, there's so many self-help books on relationships, like you can practice how to do that. You can't be like, well, I screwed up with this kid, next, give me another one. It doesn't work that way.
No do-overs here.
There's no do-overs, and there's no one that's handing your parents like, oh, here, you gave birth. Here's a book on how to treat, like,
Here's your manual, right? Yeah.
which, by the way, I think you should do that. Like, talk to, just be like, where can we work this out?
Yes. Yes, this should go home with your baby, right? Along with,
You have a baby, here's your book. Go study this.
yes. What to expect when you're expecting is the first part, and then this is the second piece.
Yes.
Definitely, there isn't a school for this, but prevention science has been around for decades, and you just have to look in the literature. But something about prevention is that it's really hard to quantify the dollars that you are saving school districts, families, organizations. But the truth is that the smaller percentage of kids like us that acted out are the biggest financial burden for schools and for families. And so if you really start from the beginning and know your prevention principles and are able to integrate that into daily life, this is not lecturing at your kids all the time. This is figuring out healthy parenting styles, attachment styles, starting there, and then integrating the information a little bit at a time into family dinners, into creating a family code, into knowing where your kids are in physical space, online, and in their brain. So you parent to brain development. So, I think one of the things that happened for me that I see in my clients is that when kids hit middle school, they go through the second phase of brain development where they start novelty seeking and which is normal. They start breaking away from parents, really normal. But a certain percentage of kids are going to experiment with high risk behavior, and high speed internet has increased that percentage, right? Because it's not just drugs and alcohol. Now it's porn. The younger, because you said earlier, like, how does that happen when a 9-year-old, I can't tell you how many calls I've received just in the past 6 months of kids who've been using porn because their parents had to give them an extra computer or tablet because they were doing online school during the pandemic, and they forgot or neglected to put on parental controls. So we've got unfettered access to the World Wide Web, which also potentially increases technology, video game addiction, gambling, access to things that we normally wouldn't have access to. And, and it also gives bullying a completely different experience, because now you've got cyberbullying, which has longer lasting negative effects. The hookup culture, all of these things that, oh my God, our poor kids of today are being just inundated with so many different risky behavior. We got to equip them.
We do. I was reading, and it's funny that I'm saying this, Chelsea Handler's book. And I was not expecting what it's been interesting, because now that I'm going to backtrack a little bit because it's going to confuse. So when I was 15, I saw A Beautiful Mind, and I'm like, nope, I don't agree. He's not crazy. Nope, that's not true. And then getting diagnosed and doing my own journey, I was on pharmaceuticals. They did not work for me. I don't have a problem with them. If they're doing their job for you, hey, you do you. But I do strongly believe that it's not a pill that's going to help you. And I'm trying to be very careful of how I say this because I know you're a doctor. So I'm like, okay, like the word anxiety. I remember when I first got diagnosed, that became like my cover for everything. Well, I'm anxious, but I stopped actually connecting with my feeling, and the word was just, I'm anxious. Mm-hmm. When I was getting off medication, the psychiatrist that was doing all of this, she asked me, she's like, what is this anxious thing? You say this all the time. What does it mean? And I was livid. I like, you're a doctor, shouldn't you know? And she looked at me and she's like, okay, first of all, I'm not trying to shame you or provoke you. I'm curious, what does anxiety mean to you? It's a chemical imbalance. She's like, okay, you're reading a textbook. I want to know what it means to you. And I couldn't tell her. I was like, I don't know. It's a chemical imbalance. Shouldn't you know? Like, isn't that what you went to school for? Isn't that what my mom is paying you for you to like explain this to me? And when I used to tell this story, I was a little ashamed of how bratty and how, excuse my language, bitchy I was. But I was being enabled to that. Every doctor I went to, you have to get used to your new normal. You have to get used to this. And for me, it was really confusing because I'm like, I don't want to. I want to go back. I don't want this normal that you're telling me. And I was getting more disconnected from my own emotions. So I see it all around everywhere where I'm talking to people and they're like, I'm anxious. I'm like, what does it mean? And half the time we don't even know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But why I was bringing all of this up is Chelsea Handler, as I was reading her book, now that I'm so well versed in attachment and attunement and all this, I'm like, oh my God, girl, this is why. Like, no, it's not that something's wrong with you. But she starts off the chapter talking about how when she was little, and she was, I'm going to say 9, she went to a sleepover and her friend got there and she's like, you need to look for the feeling. And she's like, what feeling? And they were masturbating, but they had no idea what they were doing. And they were masturbating over their jeans, and it was something that gave her pleasure, so she kept doing it. And her parents, instead of bringing it up and saying, you know what, this is a normal thing, we don't know how to have that conversation. And then there's shame around it, which is creating even more of a disconnect from you to being able to communicate. And what I've realized is, as a kid, you have no idea what you're doing. You're just doing something to try to feel something.
Feel something, exactly.
And then as a parent, I can't even imagine, because as I'm reading this, I'm like, you're 9. How did like the parents not know that they had 10 kids at their kid's house and all of them were on the carpet fondling themselves? Not saying that it's a bad thing, but how did they not notice that?
Right, where does that disconnect come from?
Yeah. So that it brought up a bunch of stuff. So when I saw that you put 9 years old, I'm like, as much as I'm having a hard time accepting that a 9-year-old is being exposed to something that they can't even understand, I also have to look back to all the things that I heard. And the first time I heard about sex was not in a positive way. It was my parents were fighting because my dad was cheating on my mom. And it was a very negative, the way they were communicating around it. So for me, fast forward when I got older, if you were at all sexually inclined, that made you bad. And I will say it, when I was 15 to 18, my libido was calling all the shots. Which when I got diagnosed and they were like, well, yes, it's because you're bipolar. It's like, no, it's because my hormones are out of whack, but whatever. You say what you need to say. That was like, oh, that's why I've always been horny. That's why I've always been. And it was like, no, it's because you haven't been allowed to explore that, and you've literally put it as it's something bad. And I didn't really realize it until I started to look at all these things. But I feel like when we're in it, we're so like, this is bad, you can't be doing this, instead of saying, you know what, there's a time and place for this.
There's a time and a place for it, and you can speak about it in developmentally appropriate ways. What I hear so many parents today are afraid of their children, are afraid to bring things up, are afraid to burst their innocence. But then you've got kids who are learning about suicide and dating violence and sex from school, which is where I learned a lot about it too. And my mom would always say, but you didn't want to hear me talk about it. Well, yeah, okay, but yeah, it's uncomfortable for a middle schooler. I'm not going to want to sit down and talk about that. But if you wait until I'm in middle school and high school, there are conversations that you can have. I've got a checklist actually in the back of the book that shows a developmental appropriate way to talk to kids about it as they grow and develop. Like, And to actually tell a child as they're growing, moving into high school, that they can develop their own sexual identity, that they can own that they can feel powerful in that, instead of having to feel like an object because of what you learn from the porn that you've been watching for years, right? And that you should be using drug and alcohol before sex because that makes it better. Like that, those are the things I learned.
Yeah, oh my God. Oh my God. Thank you for saying that. I started asking kids. I'm not now because I'm 30, and I think if I ask 18-year-olds, that's a little bit weird. But when I was like in my 20s, I was asking like 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, I'm like, when you had sex for the first time, were you under the influence of drugs or alcohol? It is heartbreakingly sad
Very.
the amount of times that people are not, because it's very small. And the
Very.
reality is, if you are having sex under the influence, you're not ready to have sex. You're doing it to fill a need that isn't being met.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely, yes.
Like,
And, when you see TV, I have to say that I get so irritated with television shows today because it's glamorizing drug and alcohol use, glamorizing underage sex, as if these things are not only a rite of passage, but just what everybody does. And when I looked into it, I looked up so many different surveys and research studies. The majority of kids and the majority of adults don't use drugs or drink alcohol alcoholically. There's actually a large percentage, over half of the percentage of the global population doesn't even drink alcohol. But you don't hear about that, right? You don't hear that on shows. It's glamorized and made to seem like it's normal. That type of normative education is really working against our kids. And then the parents are silent, disconnected, and feel powerless and scared to talk about this. I wanted to really empower parents, not only by giving them a voice, but giving them a voice that was backed up by science. Like, here's what science says actually hurts a child's identity, self-esteem, brain development. And it's interesting because if you read all the books on hookup culture, you'll see so many research studies that show kids regret it. They feel bad afterward. But then, of course, in a college culture, oh, I want to experience the party scene, the this scene. But man, when you really interview these kids after these experiences, they're hurting. And I remember feeling that way too. I'm thinking, is this what adulting is like?
I am sad to say this, but it was, I got to a point where I was just like, and I have that sometimes now when I talk to someone, and I remember some guy asked me out and he was like, yeah, let's go to a speakeasy. And I looked at him and I'm like, I don't drink. Why would you take me to a speakeasy? Well, would you, bowling sounds stupid. And at that moment I was just like, well, thank you for thinking for me. And apparently we're back to, I don't know what time, because I didn't even get a chance to say, actually, I would have preferred to go bowling.
Exactly.
Going to a speakeasy. But it is interesting how everyone, that's all. Like, I laughed when the pandemic, and I try to be mindful of people during this, but I can't go out to restaurants and bars. And I was like, really? That's your biggest thing right now? You can't go to a restaurant and a bar? Maybe that's an invite to look at how you cope when things are not good. That the thing you're missing so much in your life right now is going to a bar. And sadly, the restaurant, it's not to eat, it's so that you can drink at the restaurant, because it is culturally acceptable to drink out. But if you're drinking at home, it's not. And it's like, no, why are you drinking? I'm not saying you want to have a glass of wine because you can describe the notes and the pair with the food. Hey, you do you. But if you're just drinking because you had a bad day, that message I can't get behind, because that's the same message your kid is picking up, even if they're 5 and you don't think they are. She's grabbing wine.
Yes. And what I learned about the brain is that when you pick up the glass of wine to change how you feel, you grow long strings of neurons for dependency upon a chemical instead of long strings of neurons for learning a variety of healthy, productive ways to cope with emotions, like feeling them all the way through, meaningful connections with mutually responsive people that fill your spirit rather than using spirits to change negative feelings. I can't tell you how many adults that I talk to who say, man, I'm feeling really nervous or anxious or tense. Let's go get a drink. And I'm thinking, how about we go for a walk, or let's just talk on the phone, or let's, you know what I'm saying? Because it works so much better. And the brain structure that you build for going natural actually creates these amazing networks, not only for maturity, but for healthy sense of well-being, for being able to calm your own nervous system down, and also relate to other people in a much less reactive and more connective way.
So I have a question for you. You touched on this a little bit on the seminar that I saw you at, and it was the chemical imbalance that we can have on a, I'm going to butcher this really badly now. I'm like thinking about it. So I know you mentioned on a hormonal level, they can actually test that, but you can't on a neurobiological level. Like there's no testing with that yet. So
Oh,
when,
I think what you're talking about is because when we expose our limbic system to more and more dopamine that comes from drugs or alcohol or high risk behavior, we literally grow more and more receptor sites for dopamine, right? And we get to that point where we've just got one too many, and now we cross the line into addiction, withdrawal, cravings, tolerance, and a host of other symptoms. Whereas before, we may have had some of those symptoms, but we could modulate. It was still a choice. We don't have a test that can go in and count all of those extra neurons. We do have functional MRI technology and other brain scan type of technology that can show there is more or less activity in certain brain regions that indicate that there's potentially an addiction, but we don't have a test that can say, oh, yep, your XX is too high. Yeah, you're past the threshold. You're an addict now. We don't have that. So
no, sorry, keep going. I'm just like, wow.
right, so you have to be the person that is able to say, okay, honestly, I meet these 6 to 11 symptoms that mark addiction of any kind. And I think that I've developed biological changes that now cause me to crave and have built a tolerance. And now I have difficulty, or I'm not able to stop. But the place where you need to be, nobody wants to grow up and be an addict. So the place that you need to get to be able to say, oh yeah, that's me, I meet the diagnosis and I need to change my behavior or quit using or drinking altogether, that can potentially take years. Nobody wants to stop, until they hit the bottom where they realize they have to. What you see, though, in the majority of folks as they grow and develop into adulthood is they reduce and modulate their alcohol use. They learn their lessons. But for people who cross the line and they have too much brain structure, the process of actually getting to that place of acceptance and then treatment can take a long time. And I think it's the most painful for family members, because the family members see it. They know, they can check off all the symptoms. They feel the effects of it, but they have to wait until their loved one gets to the place of sweet reasonableness or deep demoralizing bottom before they admit and are ready to accept help.
I feel like it is, it's one of those things that everyone can want you to get help. Everyone can see it. And you're well aware of what's going on, but it's this, I just can't. It's literally this like I'm well aware of what you're saying, but I can't. And what I kind of wanted to talk to you about was there's this shame around being an addict. And what I've learned, and I feel like everything that you've been saying kind of backs this up. You didn't become an addict because you woke up one day, you're like, I have nothing better to do. Why don't I just stop shooting up? Like, that sounds like fun. It was genuinely, you learned behaviors to either keep you safe, to fulfill needs that weren't met. Like, you're basically like how I was trying to self-medicate. You're
Yes.
trying to self-medicate. And I don't want to use just drugs and alcohol because, again, it can go into food. There's so many. I was listening to a podcast about sexual, he's a sex addict, and how for some reason, because he's also a heroin addict, that is something that people can be more compassionate about, but they can't be compassionate about the sex. And he's like, I find it so interesting that people can forgive that I did drugs, but they can't forgive the fact that I cheated on my wife, and we have been able to rebuild out of that.
Yeah.
And when I was listening to it, I'm like, I don't think it's necessarily the drugs and sex is one is better or one's more acceptable. We're still, there's that shame. We're still putting this negative stigma around addict, and it's why? Right now, where we're at, 2020, I am sure that 90% of the people that said, I've never been addicted to anything, you're probably going off the marks on something. And it's because you've been dealing with things that you've never dealt with. So it's not about shaming yourself and not going, oh my God, and you don't need, not everyone needs to go to rehab.
No.
Not everyone. I say I did it. The people are like, what? I'm like, well, my mom took me out of school and then put me to live with her out in a different country. It was really hard for me to get drugs when I'm in a different country in a locked room. Kind of hard.
Yes.
But I do remember when I got off medication and I was no longer on pharmaceuticals, the first question I asked my doctor was like, can I drink? And this is her not knowing her patient well enough. She should have known, no, you have addictive tendencies. Drinking is not a drink for you. Drinking is an escape. So when she gave me the go a few months later, at first I was really scared because I thought, oh man, I mean, alcohol is a depressant. What if I like call a depression on, or I call mania, and then I'm psychotic again? So I was really respectful of it. Then something happened that put me on the floor, and I felt that need again. Instead of going into, hey, actually, I need help, the easiest thing was someone asked me to go out to dinner. Oh, look, there's alcohol. I can drink instead of talk about it. Oh, let me just drink instead of talk about it. And my therapist that I had been seeing since I was 18, my mom was very like, she's drinking, we need to do something. And she's like, wait, give her 2 months. I know her. She's literally trying to burn off steam because she's been since 18 fighting this diagnosis. Give her 2 months. If in 2 months you see things are literally, then we'll do an intervention. Literally, she was right. Within 2 months, I ended up calling her. I'm like, I'm back to where I was when I was in college. And if I don't get help now, it's not going to be alcohol, because what I'm craving is very much things that I should not be consuming. And I feel it all the time. It doesn't happen as much as it used to, but I'm around someone that's like really high energy, and they're like, I can tell, I'm like, dude, you are on like caffeine and you haven't slept. And my first thing is like, oh my God, do I need to be on their level? And it's not, I want coffee, it's, I want cocaine. And when I say that, people are like, what? Yeah, it doesn't go away. When I'm very chill and the person next to me is not, my typical tendency is, oh my God, am I doing something wrong because I'm not at their level? Like, do I need to be where they're at? But coffee's not going to get me there. So it's this internal thing, and we don't talk about it. And when I do bring it up, people want to shame. And this is my reminder, and right now my boundaries letting me know, hey, you have 15 minutes left of this call, start wrapping it up. But this negative like negotiation around saying that I am an addict. And I bring it up to people, and there's always two responses. Oh, I'm sorry. And I'm like, why? I'm not asking for you to be sorry. I'm very grateful for that. What? Yes. I would not be here if that didn't happen. I would not be connecting with you. Your message would have gone in through one ear and out the other. I would not be able to tell a friend, hey, you know what? I love you. And I say this because I care, and I'm seeing a lot of the same things that I went through. I don't think that you're drinking just to drink. I think that you might need to look at your relationship with alcohol. And even if you're mad at me for saying this, I'm doing this because I care. I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't go through what I went through.
Exactly. And it's sad to me that that's a scary thing to say to people, because we get attached to alcohol and drugs and other addictions in the same brain way that we get attached to good things in our lives. Like the same pathway that helps us get attached to parents and loved ones and friends, it's the same pathway that gets hijacked for drugs and alcohol. So we get attached. And so, when you lovingly, gently, or even firmly confront someone on it, it's like you're taking away a loved one. It was my best friend. And I'll fight to the tooth and nail. I mean, you see people when they get drunk, they fight for their keys. We do the craziest things during that. So it's really great to hear you talk about that openly. And because I think if we don't tell our stories about the shame that we experience within our own selves, and help people understand, you can't shame me more than I already shame myself. And so, we're going to talk about this openly. I'm going to talk about what I see for you, and it's out of love and care and concern. And if you don't want to stop, that's your prerogative, your choice. But can you find something more powerful to fill your spirit and to help you cope? And I think that the people know how hard that is. And so they take the easy road instead of the road less traveled. So, Andrea, I'm really proud of you and to hear your story and to be able to share and connect with you in that recovery. And it's not just a recovery from drugs and alcohol, it's a recovery of self-worth, of self-esteem, of identity, personal identity, professional, sexual, like reclaiming what we didn't get to grow as humans because we were medicating and shutting feelings down instead of really allowing our brain to grow and develop and experience struggling and learning resilience when we overcome those struggles. Yeah.
Oh man. Do you have kids, by the way? That's totally personal, but I'm like, man, I want her to be my mom.
That's so sweet. Thank you for saying that. It would be an honor. I'll be your mom. I would love to. Love it.
My mom's gonna hear this. She's like, "Wow, my mom."
I'll co-parent with her. Because I think we all need loving parental figures in our lives. I mean, there's a woman named Pat H. who has been my kind of pseudo mom for many, many years. She was my matron of honor in my wedding and stood up for me. And her and her husband are like a set of parents that I didn't get, which is a blessing to have. And so I think that we can share our kids. But I have to say, though, that, I don't have kids. It didn't happen for me. I wanted to be able to do that, but it didn't happen. But it's a really sensitive spot for me because I've had parents say, well, you don't have kids, you don't know. And, when I wrote this book, I wrote it for parents. And so, my insecurity says, golly, you don't even have kids. But I tell you what, I was a high risk kid and survived it by the grace of God. I am a therapist and I've seen so many thousands of kids and treated and take care of other people's kids, which is just like such an honor for me to do that. And I have held other parents' hands while they're going through their kids' illnesses and addictions and helped walk them through that. And so, my gosh, if that's not qualifications enough, right? I'm not sure, necessarily what is, but and I have 4 fur babies that would definitely call me their parents, right? Exactly. My husband and I are both in recovery, which is really neat to be able to marry someone. And we both wrote that into our vows that we would stay sober, which has been very important to me because I have watched couples go through horrible situations because they got married and they drank again or used again. And I really want to show up for my husband as a sober participant. I want to show up for the kids that I treat as a healthy parent figure, as a therapist that can really connect with their spirit so they feel comfortable opening up to me. And I really want to surround myself with community and friends and loved ones who are mutually responsive. I talked about this in the book, but I don't know if you've heard of the platinum rule, which is the opposite of the golden rule. And the golden rule is do unto others as you would have done to yourself, right? Which is really a very self-centered rule because you're assuming that everybody wants to be treated the way you want to be.
Right.
When I heard the platinum rule, I was like, yes, the platinum rule is treat others the way they want to be treated. And that means you have to do some work. You got to find out, oh, how do you want to be treated? And then act accordingly. You know, figuring out what other people's love languages are and then delivering that instead of being pissed that the world does not develop a love language that you would like, right? You know, as we do. But I think our world is split. It's divided. Our frontal lobes are not completely on because of all the substances and behaviors that we engage in addictively. So it makes the platinum rule guiding principle more difficult to figure out to follow. But this is one of the reasons too why I really love connecting with people like you and other people who work a recovery program, because you understand not only what it means to be disconnected from others, but from yourself. And when through that bottom, you pick yourself up and just arise from the ashes and create your authentic self, then you can genuinely connect with other people in meaningful ways that literally spike dopamine levels healthily, right? So I feel really lucky that I have built that around me and that I'm a part of that.
Oh, I am so happy to hear that. You can just, it's like radiating from you. Like, I'm just like, oh. So before we kind of close this up, if there's anything that you could say to that 12-year-old self,
Oh,
everything that you know now, and more of this, it's you've probably said it in the book, because that I was going to say, I'm like, you don't have to feel like you need to be a parent. You were the kid. You don't you were the kid. Like, you were the kid. That's like when people tell me you're not a doctor, because I coach people with mental illness, and I'm like, I don't claim to be a doctor, but I am going through I went through what you're going through. That doctor's just reading out of a book. If you want that, go over there. Like, it's all good. And it's more of, from a kid's perspective, I don't think that you can get even more qualification of.
no, and you know, this is such a good question about what I would say to my 12-year-old, because I have clients who are 12 years old.
Yeah.
And I watch them go through feeling like not enough. And so my mantra is, Crystal, you are perfect because you make mistakes. You are enough. Just keep believing that. And you will connect with people who will really be mutually responsive to you in a way that fills your spirit. And, you know, I would just swoop in and give my poor little broken 12-year-old a big hug and hold her hand through all that. Yeah. Good question. Thank you, Andrea.
Oh no, so beautiful. And then this is just a selfish question for me, because I astrologically profile everyone. You know what your sun sign is by any chance?
Sure, I'm a Gemini.
Oh my God, that's why I was like, she has to have Gemini in her. I'm like picking it up. I'm a Gemini.
That's awesome. Yeah, which is so amazing because we all really quite connect very much. Yes.
I always say, I'm like, whenever I can't, like, because I'm like, I really want to continue to talk to her. And every time I get that kind of vibe, I'm like, they either have like strong Gemini in them or strong Sagittarius energy. So I was just curious.
That's cool.
Crystal, where can people find you?
Sure. So they can find me at drcrystalcollier.com. That's my website. And my book is at neurowhereaboutsguide.com. But you could also go straight to Amazon and purchase it there. The Audible's coming out. The Spanish version will be coming out. I'm also putting together a kit for parents so they can have the stickers and the stress ball and the contracts and the checklist like at the ready so they can just pull it out. I'm also creating a clinician's kit so I can train clinicians on how to assess stage of change and levels of use in a way that actually works on connecting with your client so that they'll come back, because relapse rates are so high. What I find is that clinicians get really, really impatient working with addicts because their relapse rates are so high. But one of the best things I learned is that, if you connect with them, it's not what you tell them, what you teach them, it's how you make them feel. And so if you really understand your stage of change and are able to teach them about the brain, when they're ready to stop, they're going to come back to you. So all those will be available on the website coming up. So thank you so much for having me. I really am honored. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I just need to share this with everyone because it's so funny before we leave. I watched Crystal's seminar, it was like a month ago, honestly.
Probably,
And
yeah.
I got this like download, reach out to her, and my ego popped up and I'm like, what am I gonna tell her? Like, I'm not a doctor or anything, but it was just this like, it was this strong connection. And I emailed her and I was just like, oh, she'll email me back if she wants to. Didn't hear from her till last week. And I literally, when I saw her email, I jumped up. My cat was behind me and like ran because he was so scared. I'm like, she answered. So, guys, I think this is just a message. If you ever feel called to reach out to someone,
Do it.
You never know what's gonna happen.
Exactly. Yes. I think that you're valuable, you're worthwhile, and I want to be able to connect with everybody who wants to connect with me. It's an honor. Thank you.
I really appreciate your time. You are doing amazing work.
Thanks.
I will continue to follow your work and continue to connect in with you and see. I really am intrigued with the clinician toolbook that you're doing. I know I'm not a clinician, but I'm like, that sounds cool. I want to be.
Yeah, you could use it as, in your work with recovering people. It would definitely, yeah.
Well, guys, definitely gives Crystal some love, and I will put all of your information down on the YouTube channel so that they can get it. Thank
Wonderful.
you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.